January 17th, 1966. 6 miles above a quiet fishing village in southern Spain, two American aircraft collide in mid-air. Wreckage rains down over tomato fields, and somewhere in that wreckage, falling toward the earth, are 4 hydrogen bombs. One of them is about to vanish into the sea. It will take the United States Navy 80 days, 2 miniature submarines, and a fisherman with nothing but his memory to find it. This is the story of the bomb America lost and the ordinary man who helped find it. By the mid-1960s, the United States kept nuclear-armed bombers in the air at all times, around the clock, circling toward the edge of the Soviet Union so that no surprise attack could catch America's forces on the ground. The program was called Chrome Dome. Dozens of B-52 bombers, each one carrying multiple hydrogen bombs, flew endless patrol routes over the Atlantic and the Mediterranean, refueling in mid-air so they never had to land. On the morning of January 17th, a B-52, callsign T-16, was on the return leg of its route, carrying 4 Mark 28 thermonuclear bombs, each one far more powerful than the weapon dropped on Hiroshima. To get home, it needed one more refueling from a tanker aircraft, high above the Spanish coastline, near a small farming village called Palomares. It was a maneuver American bombers had performed thousands of times before. The bomber came in too fast. As the B-52 closed on the fueling boom, it overran the tanker slightly, and the boom struck the top of the bomber's fuselage. In seconds, the tanker's fuel ignited. The explosion consumed 40,000 gallons of jet fuel almost instantly, killing all 4 men aboard. The B-52 itself broke apart in the air. 4 of its 7 crew members managed to escape by parachute. 3 did not survive. Villagers in Palomares heard what one witness described as the sky tearing open, then watched burning wreckage fall across their fields for several minutes. And somewhere inside that falling wreckage were 4 live hydrogen bombs, now in freefall towards Spanish soil and the sea beyond it. None of the 4 bombs were armed, and none produced a nuclear explosion, but that did not mean they were harmless. 3 of the bombs fell on land. 1 landed relatively intact in a dry riverbed, but in the other 2, the conventional explosives that surround a nuclear core detonated on impact. They didn't trigger a nuclear blast. Instead, they acted almost like dirty bombs, scattering fine plutonium dust across nearly 2 square kilometers of farmland, contaminating the soil the villagers of Palomares had farmed for generations. American and Spanish personnel would eventually remove 1,700 tons of contaminated soil and vegetation, sealing it into drums and shipping it to the United States for disposal. But 3 bombs on land was not the Air Force's biggest problem. The 4th bomb was missing entirely, and unlike the others, it had not come down over dry land. A local fisherman named Francisco Simo Orts had been out on his boat that morning when the wreckage began falling from the sky. He watched something drop into the Mediterranean under a parachute far too small for whatever hung beneath it. He would later describe it to investigators as looking like half a man. When Navy officials cross-checked their casualty reports, every single crew member, alive or dead, was already accounted for. What Simo Orts had seen was not a person. It was the 4th hydrogen bomb drifting down into the sea on its parachute. For weeks, American search teams combed the Mediterranean based on complex current and wind models and came up empty. Simo Orts kept insisting he knew almost exactly where the bomb had gone in, using shore landmarks his family had navigated by for generations. Eventually, Navy mathematicians ran his bearings through a formal search model anyway. His estimate outperformed the Navy's own calculations. Locals had already started calling him Paco de la Bomba, Paco of the bomb. Finding the bomb was one thing, reaching it was another. It had settled onto a nearly 70-degree slope at a depth of over 2,500 feet, deep inside an uncharted underwater canyon carved by a nearby river. The Navy brought in one of the most advanced deep-sea tools in the world at the time, a tiny research submersible called Alvin, barely large enough for a three-man crew, on only its first ever operational mission. On March 17th, nearly 2 months after the crash, Alvin's pilots finally spotted it. A bomb-shaped object wrapped in a grey parachute resting almost exactly where Simo Orts had pointed weeks earlier. The recovery itself nearly failed. An early attempt to lift the bomb caused it to slip and tumble further down the slope, forcing the Navy to relocate it all over again, using an unmanned recovery vehicle called Curve. On April 7th, 1966, 80 days after it fell into the sea, the bomb finally broke the surface and was hoisted aboard the recovery ship USS Petrel. The United States never publicly confirmed how close the Palomares bombs came to real disaster, and for decades downplayed the long-term radiation risk to the people who lived there. Cleanup crews worked for months, some with minimal protective equipment. As late as the 2010s, monitoring teams were still finding pockets of plutonium contamination in the soil around Palomares. And it was not until 2015 that Spain and the United States finally signed an agreement addressing full remediation of the site. Operation Chrome Dome itself was quietly ended not long after, following a second, even more contaminating bomber accident near Greenland in 1968. The United States stopped flying nuclear-armed aircraft on continuous airborne patrols altogether. Francisco Simo Orts spent years afterward fighting a salvage claim through American courts, arguing that his information, not the Navy's own instruments, was what ultimately found the bomb. Spanish courts eventually agreed he deserved compensation. There is no single dramatic hero in this story, only an enormous, quietly forgotten operation involving thousands of sailors, scientists, and one fisherman who trusted his own memory of the sea over the calculations of the world's most powerful navy. 4 hydrogen bombs fell out of the sky over a farming village in 1966, and almost nobody outside of Spain remembers it happened at all.